What if Sleeping Beauty lived in the present, caught between a curse and an impossible love? Soojin grew up far from her true family, unaware that her fate was sealed by a dark prophecy. But love always has its own plans, even if it comes from the family of her greatest enemy. Can they break the spell of the past together? Soojin was barely a year old, a little girl with big, dark eyes and a disarming smile. That spring afternoon, she wore a silk hanbok in shades of white and gold, custom-made by her parents, Soojin and Minsik, especially for the occasion. A crown of small cherry blossoms adorned her head, and around her, a room full of family and friends watched her every move. The celebration was her daljanchi, a traditional Korean ceremony marking a baby's first birthday, a moment believed to bring luck and hope. During the ceremony, parents placed several objects in front of the child, each symbolizing a different future path. According to tradition, the object the baby chooses foretells their destiny. On the ceremonial mat, a few items were carefully arranged. Gold coins symbolizing wealth, a spool of thread for a long life, and a brush representing wisdom and knowledge. Soojin stared at the objects in fascination, crawling in circles around them as her parents watched, holding their breaths. "Let's see what she picks," Minsik murmured, squeezing Soojin's hand. "If she chooses the thread, it means a long life," he replied with a nervous smile. Soojin, with her tiny crown of blossoms, reached out toward the thread, but at the last moment, she turned and touched the gold coins. The guests burst into applause and laughter. The coins symbolized prosperity and success, a promise that Soojin would grow up surrounded by opportunities in a life filled with abundance. Minsik bent down to lift her daughter into her arms, kissing her forehead as Soojin giggled and reached for the lights on the ceiling. But just as the laughter and murmurs filled the room, someone began pushing their way through the crowd. CEO Young, a tall, imposing figure, advanced with firm steps. The room instantly fell silent as everyone recognized him. Kong, who stood beside Minsik, narrowed his eyes at the unexpected guest. Young was the leader of a rival family, one with whom the Park family had been feuding for as long as anyone could remember. Though few spoke of it openly, everyone knew the Young family's reputation for shady and dangerous dealings. Still, no one dared confront them. "What are you doing here, Young?" Kong demanded, his face tense. Young met his gaze with a cold, distant smile. "I've come to deliver a warning, Kong," Young said, his voice reverberating through the room. "Your family caused mine great harm. Because of your father, mine lost everything he had. It's an open secret that the Parks were behind that failed investment. My father never recovered, and in his downfall, he lost his life, his name, and his honor. Now I will make you pay. It's only fair." Kong remained silent, his jaw clenched, as the guests held their breath. Everyone knew the story. Years ago, Young's father had invested a fortune in a project that ended in failure. Rumors swirled that the Parks, business rivals, had orchestrated the collapse from behind the scenes. That loss had ruined the Young family, and many believed it had sparked the tragedy that later befell them. But the Parks always denied the allegations. "Is that a threat?" Kong asked, his voice low and taut with tension. Young stepped closer, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "No, Kong. This is a declaration. Your daughter will be the price of your ambition. When she turns 16, a curse will fall upon her and she will die. 16 years. Not a day more." Minsik felt her blood run cold. She clutched Soojin tightly to her chest, holding her as if to shield her from the chilling words. The thread hung in the air like a dark shadow as Young turned on his heel and left the room without another word, leaving behind a suffocating silence. That same night, in the living room, Kong stood by the window, frowning as he watched the lights of Seoul glitter in the distance. Minsik sat on the armchair, clutching a blanket, unable to shake off the weight of Young's threat. "We can't take any risks, Kong. What if he follows through? We know he's not an honorable man." "He could try something," Minsik whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes red from crying. Kong, still furious and fearful for his family, took a deep breath. He knew Young's words weren't just an outburst of anger, he might truly mean them. Turning to Minsik, his expression was grave and resolute. "We'll send her away, Minsik. Somewhere no one can find her. She'll live as a park when all of this is over. But until then, she'll be safe." Minsik looked at him in silence, knowing deep down that this was their only choice. "Where?" "With my sister, Hyojin. No one would suspect our daughters in a small coastal town. No one will know who she truly is. Not even her." Minsik nodded, her heart breaking, but convinced it was the only way to protect their little girl. The years passed, and Soojin grew up believing her parents had died in an accident when she was just a baby. That's what her Aunt Hyojin had told her. While there were moments when she wondered what it might be like to have a complete family, she never doubted Hyojin's love. The small house by the sea, the endless afternoons filled with laughter, and the songs she composed on her guitar were all she knew. She was about to turn 16, a cheerful teenager with an easy smile and an infectious laugh, always looking for an excuse to escape to the beach with her guitar slung over her shoulder. Soojin didn't know that the life she lived was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated secret, and that all her happiness, all those small freedoms, were only borrowed time. She adored her simple life with Hyojin, but what she loved most was the sea. The sound of the waves and the colors of the sunsets made her feel truly free, as if the world stopped when she sat on the sand playing her music. For Soojin, the beach was her sanctuary, the place where she could be herself without worrying about anything else. But that summer was unlike any other, and the reason was him. Minsik arrived in the village with the June breeze, and from the moment she saw him, Soojin knew he wasn't just another passing tourist. It happened one afternoon at her favorite spot on the beach. She was sitting in the sand, strumming chords, absorbed in the sound of her guitar, when she suddenly felt someone's gaze on her. She looked up, and there he was, tall, with sun-kissed skin, messy dark hair, and a captivating smile. Minsik watched her with an intensity that left her speechless, as if time had stopped just for them. "Do you always sing like this at sunset?" Minsik asked, walking toward her with a natural confidence. Soojin felt a shy but genuine smile escape her. "When I'm here, yes. The beach inspires me," she replied, trying not to seem too affected. Minsik sat down beside her on the sand without hesitation, as if that was exactly where he belonged. She resumed playing, feeling slightly self-conscious, but Minsik watched her as though there was nothing more fascinating in the world. Their conversation flowed as if they had known each other forever. He told her he was from Seoul, from a wealthy family, but he couldn't stand the fast-paced city life and needed a break from what felt like a gilded cage. Soon it became a routine. Minsik would wait for her almost every afternoon, just before the sun dipped below the horizon. Their encounters felt natural, as if the sea and time itself had conspired to bring them together. She grew used to laughing with him, to anticipating the gaze that seemed to understand her without words. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they simply listened to the waves and each other's breathing, comfortable in their shared silence. One evening, as she played her favorite song, he looked at her and said, "I've never heard anything so beautiful." Soojin stopped, feeling her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to compliments like that, and with Minsik, everything felt different. She lowered her gaze, playing with the sand between her fingers. "Don't exaggerate," she replied with a shy smile. But he shook his head. "I mean it," he said seriously, and for some reason, she knew he was telling the truth. Then he added, "When you sing, your voice touches my soul. It goes beyond skin, flesh, and bones. It sinks deep and stays. It leaves a mark, Soojin. I carry your voice inside me." That was when she realized, without even noticing, she had fallen in love. For the first time, she felt that fluttering in her chest, that excitement that made her heart race and tied her stomach in knots. The same was true for Minsik. She wasn't just the girl with the guitar on the beach. She was someone special, someone who made him forget everything he had left behind in Seoul. Each sunset together felt like a small world just for them, full of laughter and glances that seemed to last forever. Minsik spoke of his dreams, of everything he wanted to do far from the oppression of his family, and Soojin listened, unaware that her own world was marked by secrets. As the summer wore on, Soojin's love for him grew deeper, rooting itself in her heart as something inevitable. With Minsik, she felt alive in a way she never had before, and every time he smiled at her, she felt as though everything in her life made sense. She had no idea that this happiness, this first love, was overshadowed by a prophecy that had haunted her since the day she was born. It was the morning of her 16th birthday. Soojin woke up feeling euphoric. Later that day, she planned to meet Minsik at the beach as always. She had been thinking about this moment for days, how he would smile at her and make her feel special on her day. However, when she came down to the kitchen that morning, she noticed something unusual in her Aunt Hyojin's face. Her expression was troubled, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her voice sounded different, low and nervous. "Soojin, I need you to stay home today," Hyojin said, looking at her with a seriousness that left Soojin perplexed. "What? But why?" Soojin asked, frowning, frustrated. "It's my birthday, Auntie. I had plans, you know. I want to go to the beach." But Hyojin shook her head, her voice almost a whisper. "Promise me you won't go out, Soojin. I know it doesn't make sense, but please, just promise me." Soojin felt the weight of her aunt's gaze and nodded, though she was confused and unsettled. "Okay, I promise," she finally said, trying to reassure her. But as soon as her aunt left the house, keeping that promise grew harder by the minute. She stared out the window, thinking about Minsik, the beach, and how he would be waiting for her, smiling as soon as he saw her. Guilt gave way to excitement. She had to see him, just for a little while. Throwing on a jacket, she rushed out the door toward the beach, not thinking of anything else. Minsik was waiting for her, and when he saw her, the smile he gave her made Soojin forget all her unease. They spent time together on the sand, laughing and talking about everything they wanted to do and dreamed of. Minsik even gave her a silver bracelet with a small wave-shaped charm. "Happy birthday, Soojin," he said softly. She smiled, touched. "Thank you, Minsik. This is the best birthday ever." But time flew by, and the sun began to set. Soojin knew it was getting late and that she needed to return before Hyojin got home. "I have to go. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble." Minsik nodded and hugged her, promising to wait for her the next day. She said goodbye and ran back, but she hadn't gone far when a fierce storm began to form in the sky. The first drops of rain surprised her, and she hurried along looking for shelter. What happened next, Soojin wouldn't learn until many years later. That night, Hyojin returned home and didn't find her niece. Worried, she searched every corner of the house, but Soojin was nowhere to be found. She went out into the street calling her name, retracing all the usual paths. Her worry grew until it turned into panic. When the phone rang, Hyojin felt her stomach knot. The call was from the hospital. "Are you the guardian of Soojin Park?" the voice on the other end asked. They explained that someone had found her unconscious at the base of a cliff. According to the report, a fisherman in a nearby boat had seen something fall into the water and, alarmed, went to investigate. He had managed to pull her out before the current dragged her further away, but she was unconscious, severely injured and barely breathing. Hyojin's heart raced as she rushed to the hospital, fear growing in her chest with every passing second. They had found her just in time, but her niece was in a coma. Days later, at the hospital, Hyojin sat beside Soojin's bed, her heart shattered. Soojin's parents, summoned urgently, were devastated. Every second that passed reminded them of the warning CEO Young had given them 16 years earlier, on the day of Soojin's first birthday. 16 years. Not a day more. The prophecy had come true in the worst way imaginable. Minsik returned to the beach the next morning, Hopeful, she would appear with her guitar slung over her shoulder and that smile of hers that made everything else disappear. He sat in the same spot where they always met, staring at the horizon, waiting for her to arrive. But Soojin didn't come. He went back the next day, and the day after that, clinging to the same hope, but the result was the same. No sign of her. The small, quiet town seemed to conspire against him, as if it had swallowed the girl he longed to see again. He asked a few locals, but no one could give him a clear answer. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe Soojin didn't want to see him. Perhaps he had overstepped by giving her the bracelet, or maybe what he had felt for her wasn't mutual. The questions gnawed at him, but he had no way of finding out the truth. Weeks passed, and he had to face what he feared most. Soojin had vanished from his life, and she might never return. With a heavy heart and a head full of unanswered questions, he went back to Seoul. He was young, but that unfulfilled first love left a mark that would take years to heal. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. Minsik tried to forget her, but he never truly could. Each summer, he returned to the coastal town, hoping to see her again, as if a miracle might bring back the girl who still haunted his memories. He walked along the beach at sunset, listening to the waves, searching the breeze for the echo of Soojin's songs. But she never appeared. Over time, the image of Soojin faded into a blurry memory. Like a dream of youth, he clung to with quiet longing. But every time he heard a song that reminded him of hers, something inside him tightened, as if his heart still remembered what his mind was trying to let go of. He often wondered where she was, if she still played her guitar, if she ever thought of him. But he had no answers, only the lingering echo of a love that seemed lost forever. 10 years had passed since that fateful night when Soojin disappeared. 10 years since Hyejin had received that call from the hospital. 10 years since Kong and Minseo Park had last seen their daughter. One so full of life, lying in a hospital bed, motionless, fragile, and connected to machines that barely kept her alive. For the Parks, guilt and pain had been constant companions over the past decade. They had done everything possible to find answers, to uncover what had really happened that night. They immediately suspected CEO Jung, the man who had threatened their family years before. They moved heaven and earth, consulted lawyers, leaned on contacts in the police force, desperate for evidence linking him to the accident. But they found nothing. The doctors were clear from the beginning. There were no signs of violence, no evidence that someone had pushed Soojin. Everything pointed to an accident. The wind, the slippery ground, a misstep. As much as the Parks wanted to blame someone, anyone, the evidence wasn't on their side. Over time, their pursuit of justice or revenge crumbled. The harsh reality was inescapable. Soojin was in a coma, trapped in a dream she might never wake from. The doctors offered little hope. Each visit brought the same words. Her condition hasn't changed. It's highly unlikely she'll wake up. We're so sorry. At first, Minseo and Kong visited the hospital every day, but as the years went by, their visits became less frequent. Each time they entered Soojin's room, the weight of failure crushed them. They had done everything to protect her, to keep her safe, and none of it had mattered. The guilt became an abyss. Seeing her in that bed, lifeless, with the years draining the color from her cheeks and the light from her eyes, was a constant reminder of how they had failed as parents. But Hyejin never stopped visiting. Every week, without fail, she sat by Soojin's bedside. Sometimes she talked to her, sharing stories about the coastal town, about how people still remembered her songs and asked about her. Other times, she simply sat in silence, holding her hand. "I know you're going to wake up, Soojin," she would say, her voice steady with conviction. "I don't know when, but you will." It was an unshakable faith, a fragile thread to which Hyejin clung with all her strength. To others, it was just a delusion, a way to shield herself from the pain, but to her it was something more. Deep in her heart, she felt it. Soojin hadn't given up. Meanwhile, life went on for everyone else. Kong and Minsik buried their pain in work and maintaining appearances, but inside they were broken. Time had turned their daughter into a painful memory, a constant reminder of everything they had lost. No one expected anything to change. Not the doctors, not close friends, not even the parks themselves. Soojin was a closed chapter, though no one dared to say it aloud. But fate wasn't finished writing her story. Minsik was 28 years old and had been leading his family's company for several years. Since his father had fallen ill, he had taken on the role of CEO, navigating a world of endless meetings and complex decisions. Though young, he had earned the respect of his colleagues and even the most seasoned partners. But despite his achievements, there was still an emptiness in his life he couldn't fill. He had learned to hide it well. Days passed in a blur of numbers and strategies, while nights, though quieter, were often haunted by an echo he couldn't escape: the memory of a girl and her guitar. That afternoon, as he waited for his mother at the hospital, he tried distracting himself with his phone. But as he walked down one of the hallways, something stopped him in his tracks. He glanced into an open room and saw a girl lying in the bed, motionless, her skin as pale as the sheets covering her. Even after all these years, he knew immediately who she was. It was Soojin. Soojin, the girl from the beach, the smile that had brightened his younger days, the voice that had remained etched in his memory like an unfinished song. He walked in without thinking, as though time had unraveled, bringing him back to the sunsets they had shared and the laughter that had made him feel unlike anyone else ever had. He approached her slowly, unable to process it all. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Here she was, the person he had searched for and waited for all this time. Now it all made sense. So this was why he hadn't been able to find her. Why she had vanished as though the earth had swallowed her whole. All this time, Soojin had been in a coma. A lump formed in his throat, and his fingers trembled as he reached out to take her hand, cold beneath the covers. His chest was a storm of emotions he couldn't begin to sort. Questions, grief, relief, they all collided in a whirlwind that overwhelmed him. He leaned toward her, drawn by an impulse he couldn't explain. He kissed her softly, barely a brush, as if that single gesture could bridge the years that had kept them apart. Suddenly, the monitor began to beep loudly. Minsik pulled back, startled, as the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hallway. Nurses and doctors burst into the room. Soojin Park is waking up, one of the nurses announced in astonishment. Everything unfolded in slow motion. Soojin opened her eyes, blinking slowly, disoriented. Minsik felt as though the entire world had stopped when their gazes met. She recognized him. He could see it in her eyes. "Minsik," she murmured, her voice weak, barely a whisper. He nodded, overcome with relief and emotion. Everything he had carried for years, the weight of uncertainty, disappeared in that moment. "Yes, it's me, Soojin." She smiled faintly, and he couldn't help but smile back, tears welling in his eyes. But as he watched her regain consciousness, something on the nightstand beside her bed caught his attention. He picked up the framed photo with trembling fingers. As he looked at it, a chill ran down his spine. It was them, Soojin's parents, Mr. Kong and Mrs. Minsik Park. He knew them well. Everyone in Seoul knew them. Soojin was a Park, the girl he had searched for all these years, the one he had never been able to forget, belonged to the family his own father had sworn to destroy. Because Minsik was the son of CEO Young. Did you enjoy this modern twist on Sleeping Beauty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with your friends who might also love this story. It helps us a lot to reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe, give it a like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the second and final chapter. You won't want to miss it.